Bienvenidos, señores periodistas.
Welcome, journalists. The distinguished President of the Republic of Colombia, Juan Manuel Santos, will present the conclusions of the 6th Summit of the Americas, and he is accompanied by the distinguished Foreign Minister of Colombia, María Ángela Holguín. Mr. President. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all. As President of the 6th Summit of the Americas, I would like to state that I am most satisfied with the results of the meetings that we have held over the last 2 days here in this beautiful city of Cartagena. The active participation of the heads of state and government, and especially the quality of the debates, enabled us to adopt certain commitments on issues that we are going to focus looking forward in order to make progress in respect thereof. We reiterate that the effort to attain development and prosperity of our peoples are essential elements that must always be present in this Summits of the Americas process. We had two options when it came down to it. One option was to focus on drafting things, focusing on the usual, as has always happened. And the second was to speak in frank terms and to lay the matters on the table, the matters that unite us and the matters that divide us. We opted for the second path, to put before you the issues that unite us and also those that divide us. And because of this, I would say that this 6th summit has been a summit of dialogue and sincerity. And dialogue means talking about the issues on which we agree, and also on the issues on which there are not similar positions, but rather positions that are far apart. On this occasion, and this is something quite important which I'd like to highlight, we showed, and I think it's the first time, that there are no prohibited topics at this summit. We talked about all issues in a respectful, direct, and frank manner to bring an end to the long silences on many issues. Will involve short-term and long-term points. And the convergence, and we need to strengthen convergence of the various issues in the region. Respect, and this is something that I've insisted on personally, tolerance for differences indicates that we are a more mature region with a great potential for carrying out ambitious projects, such as those that we set forth in the mandates of this 6th summit, the motto of which was Connecting the Americas Partners for Prosperity. Most of the countries support the participation of Cuba in the Summits of the Americas process. And many of them stated that a process should be initiated to make this purpose a reality, beginning with the next summit. On the question of the Malvinas, all of the participants at this summit have set forth their positions of consensus in declarations that have emanated from the Organization of American States. And on this occasion, the debate was held without modifying those agreements, and the vast majority of countries issued an appeal to peacefully settle this dispute. The heads of state and government of the hemisphere initiated what I would describe as a very valuable discussion on the worldwide drug problem. We just had this in the session that we called the retreat, where the only ones present were the heads of state and government, the heads of delegation. There, we agreed on the need to analyze the results of the current policy that we're implementing here in the Americas, and also to explore new approaches for strengthening this struggle and to be more effective. And along these lines, we gave the OAS just half an hour ago the mandate to begin that process. The sixth summit, this summit, created much more space for participation and dialogue involving certain very important actors, for example, social actors. Cartagena hosted the forum of young entrepreneurs, workers, trade unionists, civil society, indigenous peoples. And it also increased the level of engagement with the governments on having presidents in those forums for the first time, and a large number of foreign ministers. In addition, at this summit, at this sixth summit, for the very first time, the Business Summit of the Americas was held, based on an initiative that we had that issued forth from the Colombian private sector, which counted on the full support of the national government and likewise the support of the Inter-American Development Bank, which I must thank for putting its utmost into this business forum, which was very constructive and where the business person said that it was an exceptional opportunity. The forum promoted a constructive dialogue between the business persons and the heads of state and government. And the interest that was sparked by this initiative has convinced us that we should repeat this in the future. And so this has become a new element in the summits, not only in the summits, but also we concluded that such exercises should be conducted periodically. Among the mandates that have been discussed not just now, but for some time now, at a technical level, at the level of foreign ministers, and likewise, heads of state, we identified 5 points. The first, natural disasters. There, we agreed to try to seek ways of mitigating the social, environmental, and economic impact of natural disasters by allocating resources and designing strategies that would allow us to better adapt and to better improve our risk management efforts, and also to create mechanisms for disaster prevention more effectively, or to be able to respond more swiftly. The second issue, the issue of citizen security. This is a priority matter. We have heard this from all of the countries, and it has a great deal to do with the quality of life of all citizens of the Americas. There, it was agreed to bolster cooperation and to strengthen coordination among countries as one of the ways, or one of the fundamental tools, for making our efforts to fight violence and corruption and organized crime more effective. Organized crime which has now taken the form of transnational organized crime. And we must fight it in all of its forms and expressions, because it's not just drug traffickers. The transnational organized crime is diversified into other practices as well. The third point, which is very important, is integration in infrastructure. This has been a priority which has been left in words, but we cannot postpone it any further if we want to promote the development and well-being of our peoples. Carrying out projects with a view to having hemispheric networks of roadways, railways, and electrical power interconnections. There was a great deal of discussion about the need to have electrical interconnection among us. This, no doubt, provides even more promise for the Americas in terms of development and economic growth, because it has been identified as one of the real bottlenecks in the process of development and growth of our respective economies. The fourth point, which we also consider very important, is the use of information technologies and communication technologies. This has a great deal to do with education, healthcare, and there we agreed to foster dissemination of content and to support students in the learning process and to overcome economic and social barriers through the use of technology by providing access and expanding access. And we set out the goal of designing and deepening public policies that would make it possible for us to apply those technologies on all fronts. Because it's not just education and healthcare, there's also innovation, entrepreneurship, and the economies of Latin America and Caribbean need something most urgently, which is to improve productivity and competitiveness, and to bring those technologies to micro and medium enterprises and small businesses so that they can have more tools for better developing. And the fifth point, which is fundamental in view of the situation of poverty and inequity, is eradicating and fighting poverty, inequality, and seeking equity. I have a personal bias in respect of that point. For me, it's the most important of the mandates. Everything that we do to improve infrastructure, education, security, disaster prevention, all of that should support our efforts to eliminate poverty and the design and implementation of inclusive social policies that foster something else which is very important and which cuts across all policies: employment, and decent and dignified and productive employment. That should become a priority for the entire region. The implementation of the mandates requires maintaining a periodic dialogue with all of the Latin American institutions and agencies that support this process of the summits of the Americas. I would also like to acknowledge and express gratitude to President Ricardo Martinelli of Panama, who has offered to organize the 7th Summit of the Americas in his country 3 years from now. The spirit of this summit here in Cartagena, and you heard this in my speech, was to build bridges. And the very name, connecting ourselves with one another. This has also been a personal motto, to turn economic prosperity into real social prosperity. And the first thing that should always be present in any decision should be our peoples. Everything that we do is with a view to improving the well-being of our peoples. That is why we reiterate our commitment to go forward united. We just said it. Within our differences, divergences, and discussions, the important thing here is that we are much more aware today that we need to unite. We need to unite with a view to consolidating a respectful hemisphere that lives with its differences, and we do have differences, but that also furthers a dialogue, and in particular, a dialogue among equals. We want, and we also said this right at the very end, a single Americas, a united and more prosperous hemisphere. And as the young girl who you saw at the inaugural ceremony said, united will be much stronger and will be able to attain those dreams and those objectives. Thank you. I'd also like to mention that 3 communiques were adopted on specific topics. The first is a communique that was introduced by the delegations of Brazil and Argentina on the Rio +20 conference. And there, I think that there's consensus in terms of the need for that conference, for that summit, to have concrete outcome for the good of the Americas and of all humankind. So there is a major challenge ahead of us. Second communique was introduced by the delegation of Mexico, and it refers to transnational organized crime. This also has to do with the drug question and how we can better focus our efforts. And Colombia is making a contribution and contribute much more to the discussion about how we can be more effective in fighting transnational organized crime. And the third was introduced by Colombia on the 6th Forum for Competitiveness in the Americas. These are forums that we have been holding from time to time to see how we can identify those specific points where, if we go forward in respect of them, we can substantially improve the competitiveness of the region. All of those communiques won the unanimous backing of all of the participating delegation, and that is why they were embraced as communiques. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. There will now be 5 questions, 3 from the international press and 2 from the Colombian press. Tania Rosas from the magazine Economista of Mexico will begin.
Good afternoon. Mr. President, I'd like to know whether, beyond good intentions and the official speeches, what will be done concretely to grapple effectively and to combat organized crime? And in that regard, how was the legalization of drugs, was that debated? Is this a subject that will end here? Who was in favor, who was opposed? Let me see. I believe I was very clear when I said that a mandate has been given to the OAS to commence a study on the current policies that we are utilizing in battling organized crime and drug trafficking, and to determine whether that policy is indeed working, what results it is securing, and if there are other policies that are out there that would be more effective and less expensive. That was a discussion that we had among all of the heads of state and government, and we did agree that that discussion and that analysis should be done, which is a very important step forward. And we had to task someone with doing that work. And that someone is certainly, it would be, well, we had the Secretary General of the OAS present, and through the summit process, then it seems logical and natural for this to be the OAS. And they further have the appropriate institutions and tools to do this. And if the OAS needs to, it will turn to the Pan American Health Organization, PAHO, that has specific information on the impact of drugs on public health. And it can turn to other institutions as well, including supporting the United Nations and Drug Control Program, UNDCP. And we will see, again, this is a very, very important step forward. As I noted, there were issues and there were topics where in the past no one dared even to put them on the table. This summit, perhaps, is the big difference. It's that everything was brought forward and all topics were addressed, because that didn't used to happen. In terms of concrete actions with regard to organized crime, each case has its unique features. In the struggle against drug trafficking, for example, Colombia has a policy of combating each level in the chain, each link in the chain, from the growing to the labs to interdiction, the assets of drug traffickers and money laundering on the legal, the judiciary side, the law enforcement side, our efforts at interdiction on the high seas, on land and our highways. And we, at each link in that chain, we have obtained certain experience, expertise, and technology. There are other countries that need assistance at two of those levels, or two of those links. Some countries need assistance in one, or others that have the same problem that we do, because they also have problems from production up to the level of consumption. So depending on each country's situation, we will seek to coordinate better at those different stages. In the specific case, again, of drug trafficking. In the case of organized crime, there's a much broader array of businesses involved, because that's the way they work. So you begin to see extortion, racketeering, other criminal activities, and we again need to focus on the specific requirements and situation of each country. But again, the important thing at this summit is the absolute willingness of all countries. The United States and Canada have said this expressly. Even Argentina and Chile, all countries are committed to collaborating more effectively and to coordinate better, to be more effective in combating organized crime.
Legalización.
Legalization? What legalization? Let me reiterate. We were not talking about legalization of drugs as many people sought to frame this. We had a discussion on researching, on studying the drug problem that all of our countries are confronting. It's not just the countries in the Americas, it's a global problem. And we're seeking to see whether what we are doing is effective. Because what some countries said is, look, what we're doing is not mistaken. The problem is that we're not doing it with the necessary effectiveness. And that will also be one of the points to be evaluated. So therefore, all of the options are on the table. Someone also talked about the Asian approach. In some cases in Asia, they have a death penalty in place for drug traffickers. Very drastic, draconian punishments. So all of the options are open. And that's why the OAS will study a series of scenarios that will need to be looked at, evaluated, but this will be done by experts. Because many discussions on this topic are done based on assumptions. Well, fine, if this is done, it will have this other effect. Well, then the question is, where is the certainty that that will occur? Where is the research? Where are the studies that support that assumption? We need to look at the facts and then see what policies and what alternatives are out there, if any, that could be adopted in the future. Let me reiterate, to hopefully be more effective and have lesser expenses. Luis Forero of El Tiempo. Good afternoon, President Santos. I wanted to ask you about your personal feeling. You've referred to the 5 thematic areas, but it seems nonetheless that you end up being the ham and the sandwich, if you'll forgive me this rather folkloric expression, but in the relationships, particularly with the United States. I mean, what happened in terms of the political discussion on drugs, on Malvinas, on Cuba, and I mean, you've referred to a couple of these things in your presentations, but perhaps there was no feedback or no response, particularly by President Obama on Malvinas and on Cuba. Well, I end up with a very comfortable feeling more than anything else. I don't feel that we're the ham and the sandwich. On the contrary, I think we're the hinge, because we did really facilitate the dialogue. A dialogue that, as I said a moment ago, didn't exist previously. The topic of drugs was one that no one dared to propose. The topic of Cuba and the Malvinas were not addressed. At the summit, they were. And I'm tremendously pleased that this has happened. And everyone has acknowledged this. Both sides on the extremes. They've said, finally, what a wonderful summit. Finally, we are addressing the issues. Because in the past, it's been these declarations that at the technical level were drafted and crafted, and then the presidents came and they signed off on them, and they all went home. But they never discussed the hot topics, the issues of the day. But here they were, all of them. And I think that that constitutes tremendous progress, because this is what will enable us to strengthen our integration, respecting the differences that exist among us. That is how relationships work at all levels. And so therefore I feel very, very much, I'm very satisfied. Carolina Alcalde from Versión. Good afternoon, Mr. President. I would like to know what happened with Cuba. We know that there will be another summit of the Americas. The countries that belong to ALBA have said that they will not attend. And I'd like to know what it will happen and whether you will be asking Cuba to review their domestic policies, considering that there is a democratic charter which appears to be what impedes Cuba's presence in this type of fora. And also I'd like to know whether there is or is there not a final declaration. The topic of Cuba is one of those hot topics in which no one at this summit thought that a decision would be made. But however, there was a debate for the first time. The majority of the countries present expressed their position, stating that they hope that Cuba will not continue to be excluded from this summit process. We've never seen this before. And the process means that we need to engage in building bridges and making contact, that we would hope that within 3 years we will be able to have Cuba present at the next summit. That is a process. But let me reiterate and let me please highlight and be very clear on this. The topic was addressed, and some said Cuba should be here, and others said, well, until such and such a thing happens, it is a thorny issue indeed. But the discussion happened, and the majority of countries expressed their opinion, and that in and of itself is tremendously important. And I would hope that within 3 years, Cuba would form part of the summit process. No, there is no declaration, precisely because there is no consensus. The question is from Juan Carlos Aguirre from NTN4. One thing is the OAS and the Democratic Charter, and the other is the summit process. These are two different fora. Madam Minister, Mr. President, good afternoon. It would appear that this summit logged a disagreement. Ortega, Chavez, and so forth have one position, and President Obama of the United States also said that this summit didn't really make much sense. It didn't have meaning for him because coming here, it seems to be just to hear criticisms of the United States, and it is a throwback to debate of 50 years ago. Now, I wonder what your assessment is of this, because there are 3 communiques, but no declaration, and it seems that we get the impression that the thorn in the crown was Cuba that kept this from happening. And I'd like to know also what I believe that Peru has a proposal on the floor with regard to this, and we'd like to know what that proposal is. First of all, I didn't get the perception that everyone was blaming the United States as if the U.S. were responsible for everything. I didn't get that message. On the contrary, I saw a U.S. president with a tremendous amount of patience, seated for 2 days, listening to the 33 other countries on the continent talking about everything under the sun. And it was constructive and it was positive. And that's why I believe that we will see emanating out of these sessions a United States that is more aware, more cognizant. And President Obama himself had said that in the CEO and the Business Summit. And so they are, as the word that he used was, more excited to see greater integration. He was more excited, that is what he said, in the opportunities for greater integration. The fact that there is no declaration is not a failure. On the contrary, I believe, and let me reiterate the fact that we have been able to discuss these topics is wholehearted success. Let me note the President of Uruguay said the fact that we are here together talking constitutes substantive progress. The President of Costa Rica said to me when she bid me farewell, "I've never attended such an interesting and productive summit previously." That's what she said. And so the feeling is practically unanimous in that regard. Although agreement has not been struck, that's fine. Who would have come to think that we would have reached an agreement on Malvinas or on Cuba? We all knew that there would not be agreement on that. We knew that. We knew that ahead of time. And so therefore, there's no surprises, no negative surprises. There are favorable, pleasant surprises. And of course, these summits, which are subject to consensus, in which a few countries or a single country can say, "No, I disagree." Well, in that case, there can be no declaration and no joint statement. That is the way the system works. And I do not believe that the word failure is the term at all. I believe that this summit has been an important step toward our true objective of bringing the Americas closer to its common goals. In terms of Peru, as to whether Peru made a proposal for a summit or a meeting, better put, of ministers of foreign affairs on the topic particularly of drugs. What I've been told is that they have not had time to secure the support of all of the members that were present, but the minister is telling me that there has been support for a meeting. But yes, that proposal has been accepted, and that meeting will take place. It was a proposal on a meeting on the topic of drugs, and it will take place, and it was submitted by Peru. Very well. We will then give Paola Caora from Caracol. Good afternoon, Mr. President. I'd like to know exactly what it was that the President of Argentina said at the end of her inaugural presentation, insofar as the topic of Malvinas was not included. And was it that she left the summit early because Malvinas was not included? I bid her farewell after the official photograph. And she stayed until this morning, and she had told me ahead of time that she had to return, and she had a series of issues that she was grappling with in Argentina, and we bid each other farewell with the same fraternity and warmth that we have always had in our relationship. And so therefore I do not believe that she has left for any particular reason, and just like President Humala left last night, because there were specific issues and that required his attention in his country, as did she. Now, what did she say to me? Well, I'm sorry, what was the question? Well, I had the hummingbird here. I gave her the hummingbird, and she said that you overlooked Malvinas. Something along those lines. I don't recollect exactly, but it was something like that. The interpreters apologize. Without a microphone, we are not privy to the comments from the floor. Thank you very much for your presence. Thank you very much, Mr. President Santos, for your presence.